It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when the unexpected happened. I had come over to my friend's house, expecting the usual routine, some video games, idle chatter, nothing remarkable. But my friend was out running errands, leaving the house unusually still, bathed in the soft, golden light of late morning. That's when she appeared, my friend's mom. A woman of 40, with long black hair cascading past her shoulders, effortlessly framing a face marked by subtle laugh lines and dark brown eyes that seemed to see more than they should. She moved with a quiet grace, her curvy figure carrying the kind of confidence that didn't demand attention, but naturally drew it. She greeted me with a warm smile, and something about the ease in her posture, the tilt of her head, the softness in her voice, made the room feel suddenly intimate. "Bored?" she asked, her tone gentle yet teasing. I laughed nervously, but she didn't push, letting the question hang like an invitation. There was a subtle rhythm to her movements, the way her fingers brushed the edge of a table, or how she leaned slightly closer when she spoke, as if closing a small but significant distance between us. We started talking about ordinary things at first, books, movies, weekend plans, but her presence made even the mundane feel charged. Every word she spoke carried experience, a quiet wisdom I couldn't help but notice. There was a softness in her expression when she listened, a slight nod, a tilt of the head, a patient smile that made it easy to speak, easy to share thoughts I usually kept to myself. Her laugh was melodic, a warm vibration that lingered in the room. And then, without meaning to, our hands brushed, a fleeting contact, but it sent an unexpected jolt through me, a subtle warmth that I tried to mask with a casual shrug. She had this uncanny way of making me feel seen, yet never exposed. Her dark brown eyes seemed to hold curiosity, amusement, and something unspoken all at once. I found myself leaning in a little, listening harder, noticing more, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, the soft sway of her hair, the way sunlight caught the strands. Time stretched in the quiet tension of our small interactions, measured not in minutes, but in glances, smiles, and fleeting touches. By the end of that afternoon, what began as casual companionship had shifted into something far more significant. There was a connection, subtle but undeniable, an emotional current that neither of us named yet. I left the house that day feeling a strange combination of exhilaration and hesitation, my mind replaying every glance, every smile, every lingering brush of her hand. Something had begun, something slow, something unspoken, but its presence was unmistakable, and I knew that this was only the beginning of a journey neither of us fully understood yet. The next encounter felt different, though I couldn't explain why. That evening, I returned to my friend's house, expecting nothing more than passing time, but the moment she appeared, the air shifted. She had changed into a soft cream blouse and fitted jeans, the fabric draping effortlessly over her curvy figure. Her long black hair was loosely pinned back, a few strands escaping to frame her face, catching the warm glow of the late afternoon sun. She looked up from her book with that same gentle smile, dark brown eyes twinkling with curiosity and amusement. Even in the simplest movements, turning a page, tucking a stray hair behind her ear, she carried a quiet confidence, a mature ease that both intrigued and unnerved me. We started casually, talking about our days, but I noticed the small gestures immediately. The way her hand lingered near mine as she reached for a cup of tea, the soft brush of her fingers against my arm when she laughed. It was subtle, almost accidental, but the warmth it sparked was impossible to ignore. She had a way of listening that felt immersive, drawing me out with just her presence, her occasional tilt of the head, and the soft exhalation that punctuated her words. Each glance between us carried a silent question, a hint of teasing curiosity that made the air feel electric. Her stories were rich with life experience, told casually, yet each one seemed to carry a lesson. She spoke of challenges she had faced, moments she had savored, and choices that shaped her into the confident woman before me. I found myself leaning closer, absorbed in the rhythm of her voice, noticing the subtle details, the slight freckles across her cheeks, the gentle curve of her lips when she smiled, the soft rustle of her blouse as she moved. Every gesture felt intentional, yet natural, a quiet dance of closeness that drew me in without words. At one point, she set the book down and rested her hand lightly on the back of the couch near mine. The contact was brief, just the tips of her fingers grazing the fabric, yet it left a warmth lingering long after she moved. I realized that I was beginning to notice everything about her, the small habits, the way she tilted her head when amused, the calm steadiness in her posture. Each detail added layers to the quiet tension building between us. Time seemed to slow, measured in smiles, subtle touches, and pauses that lasted longer than they should. There was no rush, no urgency, only a growing awareness of the unspoken connection that had begun to take shape. She laughed softly at something I said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and my chest tightened, a strange mixture of admiration and curiosity I couldn't name. By the evening's end, the room felt charged with something unspoken. The connection from our first meeting had deepened, a slow and steady current running beneath the surface of ordinary conversation. I left with the sensation of lingering warmth, a quiet flutter of anticipation, and the unmistakable awareness that our encounters were no longer casual. Something was beginning to grow between us, a subtle, undeniable tension, tempered with warmth and mutual respect, a promise of lessons yet to come, and experiences I didn't fully understand. A few days later, I found myself back at the house, unsure why I had come, but knowing I wanted to. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the room in warm golds and ambers, the kind of light that makes ordinary spaces feel almost magical. She was there, as always, moving with that quiet confidence that seemed both natural and deliberate. Her long black hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, catching the light in subtle highlights. She wore a soft, pale blue blouse tucked into high-waisted trousers that accentuated her graceful posture, her dark brown eyes meeting mine with that familiar mixture of amusement and quiet curiosity. We began talking about music this time, and I realized how easily her presence encouraged me to open up. She asked questions, small and thoughtful, nudging me gently to share more than I usually would. Every gesture carried an unspoken intention. The tilt of her head, the soft exhalation as she listened, the gentle way her fingers brushed the edge of a coffee cup. It was subtle, almost accidental, but it left a warmth lingering in the space between us. Her voice was calm and soothing, each word carefully measured yet effortless, creating a rhythm that made me feel understood. I noticed the little details more than ever. The slight freckles on her cheeks, the curve of her lips when she smiled, the quiet laugh lines that spoke of years of experience and warmth. When she laughed softly at one of my stories, her hand brushed mine lightly as she gestured, and a jolt of electricity ran through me. I wasn't sure if she meant to make contact, but the effect was undeniable. It was the kind of touch that stayed with you, lingering in memory long after the moment had passed. Her presence made the room feel intimate without being intrusive. She had this way of making space for conversation, yet somehow narrowing the distance between us at the same time. I found myself drawn to her energy, the steady warmth she exuded, the effortless way she balanced playfulness and gravitas. It was confusing and exhilarating all at once, a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and something I couldn't quite name. At one point, she leaned forward slightly to reach for a notebook, and our shoulders brushed. The contact was brief, almost incidental, but it left a resonance I couldn't ignore. I realized that I was starting to notice every subtle motion, every expression, every small laugh. Time seemed to stretch in her presence, measured not in minutes, but in glances, shared smiles, and fleeting touches. By the end of the afternoon, it was clear that the connection was deepening. What began as casual encounters had evolved into something far more intricate, a slow, steady current of unspoken tension and mutual understanding. I left with my thoughts racing, replaying every glance, every touch, every word, feeling a strange mix of anticipation, nervousness, and quiet exhilaration. The slow burn of curiosity, warmth, and subtle desire had firmly taken root, promising lessons and experiences that were only beginning to reveal themselves. The following week, the air between us had shifted. It wasn't overt. Nothing had been said, but there was a quiet anticipation in the way I approached the house. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting soft golden light across the living room, highlighting the familiar warmth in her presence. She was sitting on the couch, legs crossed, a gentle smile playing at the corners of her lips. Her long black hair was loosely pinned back, a few strands falling over her shoulders, and she wore a soft cream cardigan over a fitted top with dark jeans. Her dark brown eyes met mine and held me there for a moment longer than usual, a subtle invitation I couldn't quite name. We started talking about her recent weekend plans, casual conversation at first, but the rhythm quickly changed. There was a closeness developing, not just in proximity, but in understanding. She leaned forward slightly as she spoke, resting her forearm on the couch near mine. The air seemed charged with something unspoken. When her fingers brushed against mine while reaching for a cushion, I felt a small spark, a warmth that made my chest tighten. I told myself it was accidental, yet it lingered in a way that I couldn't shake. Her laughter was soft, almost melodic, and every time it spilled into the room, I caught myself watching her more closely, how the corners of her eyes crinkled slightly, the way her lips curved, the gentle tilt of her head when amused. It was intoxicating, not in a bold or aggressive way, but subtle, a quiet pull that made it difficult to focus on anything else. She asked me about my week, but her questions seemed to carry a dual purpose: curiosity and connection, an unspoken desire to draw me out, to understand me more deeply. At one point, she stood to retrieve a book from the shelf. As she turned back, her hand lightly brushed my shoulder, a fleeting touch, almost imperceptible, yet it lingered in my mind. My pulse quickened without my control. There was a softness in her presence, a steadiness that made me feel grounded even as my thoughts spun. Her movements were graceful, confident, and entirely natural, the kind of ease that comes from years of experience yet is never forced. I noticed her subtle gestures more than ever, the way she adjusted her hair, the slight arch of her brow when teasing, the quiet patience in her listening. Each interaction carried a weight I hadn't felt before, a tension that was both thrilling and unnerving. There was a closeness forming, a delicate balance between respect, curiosity, and the unspoken pull of attraction. By the time I left that evening, the connection had deepened into something tangible. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. There was an emotional intimacy developing, a rhythm to our interactions that left me replaying every touch, glance, and word on the way home. The subtle warmth of her presence lingered with me, an unspoken promise of lessons, closeness, and experiences that were slowly revealing themselves. The slow-burn tension between us had grown, unhurried but undeniable, drawing me into a world I hadn't expected, yet couldn't resist. By the time the fifth encounter arrived, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. I wasn't sure if it was excitement, curiosity, or something else entirely, but the moment I stepped into the house, the familiar warmth of her presence settled around me like sunlight. She was in the kitchen this time, wearing a soft olive green blouse that draped gracefully over her figure and dark jeans. Her long black hair fell over her shoulders in gentle waves, framing her face with an effortless elegance. Her dark brown eyes met mine with a subtle, knowing smile, the kind that made it impossible to look away. We started with small talk, but quickly, as always, the conversation deepened. She asked thoughtful questions, not intrusive but carefully crafted, drawing me out in ways I didn't even realize I was craving. The rhythm between us was growing, a silent understanding building with each word, each glance, each slight movement. Her presence was magnetic in the quietest way, grounding yet stirring emotions I hadn't expected to feel. While preparing tea, she leaned slightly closer than necessary, her elbow brushing mine ever so lightly. It was almost accidental, but the warmth it left behind was undeniable. I found myself noticing every subtle detail: the curve of her lips when she smiled, the way her shoulders relaxed when she laughed, the soft laughter lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of a life full of experience. Each tiny observation made her seem more real, more layered, more fascinating than I could have imagined. As we talked, she reached for a mug and our fingers brushed again. This time, the touch lingered just a moment longer, and my pulse quickened. I was acutely aware of the slow, deliberate pace of her movements, the graceful way she shifted her weight, the subtle tilt of her head, the warmth radiating from her presence. There was a closeness building, unspoken but palpable, a delicate tension threading through our interaction that made ordinary moments feel extraordinary. Her laughter filled the kitchen, light and melodic, and for a moment, I caught the way sunlight reflected off her dark brown eyes, making them seem even more alive. I realized I was drawn not just to her beauty, but to the depth of her presence, the calm steadiness, the playful curiosity, the quiet wisdom that seemed to guide every gesture. There was a magnetic pull I couldn't resist, a growing awareness that our connection was becoming something rare and meaningful. By the end of the afternoon, the subtle intimacy between us had deepened. What started as curiosity and polite conversation had evolved into a shared rhythm of gestures, glances, and touches that hinted at something more. There was a silent promise in the way she looked at me, a warmth that lingered even as I left the house. The slow-burn tension had matured, drawing me in with every laugh, every subtle brush of her hand, every lingering look. I left with a quiet exhilaration, a sense that our encounters were no longer casual. They were becoming a rare, delicate bond, unspoken but undeniably real, and I knew that there was still so much more to discover. By the sixth encounter, the connection between us had grown unmistakably strong, yet remained unspoken in its deeper layers. I walked into the familiar living room, sunlight spilling through the windows and casting a warm glow across the furniture. She was sitting near the window, a soft linen blouse draped elegantly over her frame, paired with dark tailored pants that emphasized her poised, graceful posture. Her long black hair fell in gentle waves over her shoulders, catching the light with subtle highlights, and her dark brown eyes held that familiar mix of amusement and quiet understanding. She greeted me with a small smile, and in that instant, the air felt different, lighter, charged with a subtle tension that was both exhilarating and grounding. Our conversation started casually, as always, but quickly deepened. She asked about my week, but in a way that revealed her genuine curiosity, prompting me to share details I hadn't thought to tell anyone else. Her attentive listening, the gentle tilts of her head, and the way her fingers brushed the edge of the coffee table near mine created a quiet intimacy that I couldn't ignore. At one point, she reached over to adjust a cushion, and our hands brushed lightly. The contact lingered just a moment longer than necessary, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a slow, subtle thrill that I couldn't dismiss. It wasn't bold or demanding, but gentle, deliberate, like a quiet invitation. She had this uncanny ability to make the simplest actions, like reaching for a cup or tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, feel significant, infused with unspoken meaning. We talked about life in broader strokes this time: dreams, fears, small regrets. And her words carried a softness, a wisdom that came from experience. Every glance, every laugh, every subtle gesture reinforced a growing closeness. Her dark brown eyes sparkled with curiosity, and I found myself captivated not just by her beauty, but by the depth of her presence, the confidence, warmth, and quiet assurance she exuded. I leaned slightly closer as she spoke, noticing the curve of her lips, the subtle freckles along her cheeks, the faint lines that marked years of laughter and resilience. The conversation lingered, and at one point, our shoulders brushed as we reached for the same book. It was brief, almost accidental, yet the warmth remained, echoing through me long after. Time seemed to slow in her presence, measured not in minutes, but in glances, touches, and shared smiles. Each interaction carried a weight that was growing, a tension both delicate and undeniable. By the end of the afternoon, it was clear that what had begun as curiosity had evolved into something deeper, a slow, steady current of trust, warmth, and unspoken desire. The connection between us had matured, subtle yet powerful, a gentle promise that neither of us needed to articulate. As I left the house, the lingering warmth of her presence stayed with me, leaving a quiet thrill, a flutter of anticipation, and the awareness that the most meaningful moments were still ahead. The next visit felt different from all the others, though nothing had been explicitly said. Sunlight streamed through the living room windows, bright and golden, illuminating the familiar space. She was there, seated on the couch in a soft, cream-colored blouse and fitted dark trousers, her long black hair falling in gentle waves over her shoulders. Her dark brown eyes met mine with that same quiet, knowing smile that had become so familiar. Yet this time there was a new depth in her gaze, a recognition of the connection we had nurtured over the past encounters. We began talking as we always did about mundane things at first, but the rhythm between us was richer now, more comfortable. Every glance, every slight tilt of her head, every subtle smile carried an intimacy that had slowly built over time. I noticed the faint freckles across her cheeks, the soft laugh lines that spoke of years of experience, and the effortless elegance in the way she moved. When she laughed, lightly and warmly, her fingers brushed mine as she reached for a cup of tea. This time, the touch lingered slightly, deliberate yet gentle, and a quiet warmth spread through me, a feeling that was no longer fleeting. It had settled into something steady and comforting. We talked about life, about hopes and fears, and she shared stories of her past with a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. It was in these moments, the small sighs, the slight pauses, the way she leaned closer when sharing something personal, that the depth of our connection became undeniable. I felt the same openness in myself, a willingness to share more than I had with anyone else. Each word, each gesture, was a thread weaving a bond that felt both fragile and enduring, a tapestry of trust, curiosity, and gentle affection. At one point, she reached out to adjust a cushion, and our hands touched again. This time, I didn't flinch. Instead, I let my fingers brush hers, feeling the warmth linger. There was no rush, no urgency, just a quiet, mutual acknowledgement of what had grown between us. Her presence was grounding, comforting, yet thrilling in the subtle ways it stirred emotions I hadn't expected. I realized that the connection we had built over these encounters was not fleeting. It was real, rooted in understanding, respect, and a slowly blossoming fondness. As the afternoon wore on, we shared a moment of comfortable silence. I noticed the sunlight highlighting the soft contours of her face, the gentle curve of her lips, and the calm steadiness in her posture. She glanced at me, and in that brief look, a mutual understanding passed between us. No words were needed. The slow-burn tension that had been building over weeks had resolved into a quiet warmth, an emotional closeness that was safe, meaningful, and deeply satisfying. When I finally left, the memory of her presence stayed with me. I felt a calm exhilaration, a sense of completeness, and an awareness that our bond had reached a new level of intimacy, a connection that was steady, mutual, and lasting. The journey that began with curiosity and subtle tension had reached its warm, fulfilling resolution, leaving a lingering sense of closeness that neither of us would forget.